Smiling in humans is a sign of joy and trust, but in other animals it can be rather disturbing, because for them, smiling often is a sign of stress and hostility. But how are you meant to feel when something that shouldn't smile suddenly does in the dark of the night from the middle of the woods? Well, that's when you sell your house and move very far away. Today I've got some very creepy, allegedly true stories to share with you. Enjoy. And be sure to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org. I'm looking for stories from Arizona, more trucker stories, and state park stories. Also, check out our new shows, Destination Terror and Tales from the Break Room, on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Now, let's begin. Something on the road. From It's Scary Every Time. I will admit I was completely sleep deprived when this happened, and I've chalked it up as some brief yet terrifying hallucination. Then again, is it possible that our minds can get so focused on the day-to-day that we often don't see what's really there? I was working third shift at a distribution center for the better part of a year. I never had little more than a couple of close calls with some deer. Well, it was the last work day of the week. I was so fried. It was 4 a.m. and pitch black. The 45-minute drive typically always goes without an issue. But that night was very different. Like I mentioned, I was sleep deprived. After all, my neighbors enjoyed loud music and jam sessions throughout the week. I was pretty out of it at the time. I was driving through a very, very small town. I mean like one traffic light that's always flashing yellow, blink and you miss it type of town. That's where I saw something. As I approached said flashing light, I saw something planted in the middle of the four-way this light governed over. It was, for lack of a better description, a humanoid. Impossibly pale-skinned, nearly see-through, with long, wet, bright red hair that clung to it all the way to the middle of its back. It was completely nude and crouched right in the middle of the road as if coveting something precious. I slowed down my car, but not enough to avoid hitting this entity. Right before I made contact with it, it looked up from whatever it was holding on to and noticed me. Ugh, still gives me freaking chills. There were voids, pitch black nothingness where its eyes and mouth should have been. The face completely lacked eyebrows, as if those voids devoured them for some reason. The darkness that was its mouth was shaped very leech-like, ready to suck a soul straight out of anything if it wanted to. Right when I should have hit whatever was on that road, it was gone. No rush of movement, no bright flash of light, no scream, no thump on the car, which I had fully expected. Nothing but silence. My heart wanted to burst out of my chest. I saw something that I could not explain so vividly, and I still can't properly work it out. I checked every mirror in my car to see if anything was there. Not a trace, not even any other cars to explain some light beams crossing nonsense to help me explain it away. I raced home faster than usual, and I did not sleep at all that day. I've been tempted to paint it. Not that I'm any artist, but I'm honestly scared to. What if my tired mind saw beyond something I never did before, or have again? What if seeing it again makes that happen more regularly? I'll wrestle with that later. Anyway, there it is. Just glad I could get it all down, to be honest, even if it's not believed by some. What the heck was that thing? From Pleasant Peasant. The first thing I'd like to say is I don't know what I saw that night. It was late, I was tired, and it was dark. But what I do know is that whatever I saw was not normal. I live in the suburbs of San Antonio, Texas. My sister and I were driving along the road one night. It was about 11 p.m. My sister, Laura, and I were hungry, so we decided to drive to Raising Cane's Chicken Fingers. It was a Friday night, and they were open until 1 a.m. Our parents were out of town that weekend, so the two of us were free to do whatever we wanted. That included watching scary movies, eating junk food, and staying up real late. Laura was 18 at the time and I was 15. We had helicopter parents, and they didn't like us to watch R-rated movies or stay out super late. Nevertheless, we decided to watch The Taking of Deborah Logan, an R-rated horror film. We were pretty creeped out after it, and Laura didn't want to go outside, but I had talked her into it by offering to buy her some food. She reluctantly agreed, but how I wish I had trusted her gut. We go to an exclusive private school where we have to take back roads to get to. These back roads are very windy and forested, with few houses spread apart. After about 10 minutes of driving, we turned into about the fourth turn, where it was the darkest. We weren't really listening to the radio. We didn't like it, and there was a blip in the conversation. Our headlights illuminated a small herd of deer in the tall grass. At first, we thought nothing of it. There were a lot of deer near us, and it was pretty common to see some deer after dark. However, as I looked a little closer, I saw something strange. I told Laura to slow down so I could get a better look, and what I saw scared the living daylights out of me. One of the deer appeared to have its skin falling off, and the skin that was still on had black bubbles on it. Its legs also looked broken, like it had 2 knees on every leg. I looked at Laura, who had stopped the car, and her eyes glazed over, her mouth wide open. When I looked back at this deer, it had cocked its head to one side, then started to slowly smile at me. It was very unnatural. Have you ever seen a dog look at you like it's smiling? It looked nothing, and I mean nothing, like that. There are no words to describe it. I just knew it wasn't normal. My body was frozen at this point, and I didn't dare to turn away from it and look at Laura. After about 20 seconds of it just smiling at us, it began to slowly walk towards our car. 30 feet, 20 feet, 15 feet, 10. Suddenly, something roared to life in me, and I screamed at Laura to floor it. There was no response. I turned and I slapped her in the face. I know it's wrong to hit people like that, but I was trying to keep us from dying, or whatever that thing was about to do to us. Finally, she woke from her trance and put the pedal to the metal. We shot out of there as fast as we could, and I didn't look back. When we pulled into the Cane's parking lot, the two of us just sat there. Our appetites had disappeared. We must have sat there for a good 5 minutes before finally speaking. "What the heck was that?" I said. She never responded. We just drove home. We avoided the forested path by taking the highway instead, which would take us about 15 minutes longer to get back. But I didn't complain. Since then, we've never driven on that road at night, and Laura and I have never talked about whatever that thing was. This has been my first and hopefully last encounter with the paranormal. I know now that there are things in this world that we do not understand, and many of these missing person cases may not be normal takings, but instead creatures of the darkness which feed on humans. If we had not gotten out of there at the exact second, I would not be telling you about this story. You can choose to believe me or not, but that doesn't change what happened. To this day, I wonder if it was a not deer or a skinwalker. Whatever and wherever you are, dear, let's never meet again. Lured into the Woods, from Jake 07. When I was in high school, by the nature of my hometown, the parties I would go to were just bonfires, with way too many kids to fit all of us, sitting around one small fire pit. So naturally, being teenagers, the focus would always quickly shift away from the fire itself to God knows what other stupid teenager stuff. Often, back in grade school, that meant breaking into someone's parents' alcohol stash, ding-dong ditching, TPing some poor neighbor's house with an obscene amount of toilet paper, or just wandering the neighborhood up to no good, like some sort of old-timey British street gang, or sometimes all of the above. And often, once we got really bored, the focus would inevitably return to the bonfire, where we'd toss random things into the flames just to see what would happen, or place coins in the smoldering embers until the metal turned red hot, or try to enhance the fire by tossing a cup of gasoline onto it, but overshoot and accidentally set the lawn on fire. A story for another time. There was one occasion my friends and I were invited over to a small party at this girl's house. Let's call her S. And of course, we obliged. The ironic thing about this particular bonfire is that it was extraordinarily tame. Most of our time there was spent with all of us just sitting around the fire and joking about. Most, if not all of the people there were part of a group with which my friends and I had gone to see a new horror film the night before. So all night at the bonfire, a lot of us were on edge. Us boys being boys, we would point out every little noise we heard coming from the woods and ham it all up, saying we heard voices or twigs breaking, or we saw shadows moving amongst the trees, just to scare the girls. They ended up moving their chairs so that their backs no longer faced the forest. However, there were a few times later on in the night when I wasn't making it up, and I actually did start to hear or see something weird in the woods, like a creepy voice and shadows disappearing behind tree trunks. I didn't think much of it though. I mostly just dismissed it as paranoia from having seen that movie the previous night. So I just played it off, carrying on with the joking and theatrics. Later on, the whole group got up, and we were wandering around the neighborhood for some reason I can't remember. This time it was a specific reason, not just teenage mischief. Once we were done with whatever it was we were doing, we headed back to the fire pit. As soon as we sat back down, however, my friend A realized he had lost his phone somewhere and figured he must have dropped it in the grass somewhere while we were out walking around. So some of us stood back up and we went to scour the neighborhood for A's phone. Eventually, we did find the phone after maybe a half hour of searching, but almost at the same time, we noticed that one of our group was missing. My other friend B, who had been with the search party, was nowhere to be found. So we continued to search, only now it was for our missing friend instead of some phone. But we couldn't find him. We searched the entire neighborhood, yelling his name, texting and calling him, but all to no avail. We eventually made our way back to the bonfire to regroup with the rest of our friends, enlisting them for help. When we got back to S's house, however, there he was, our missing friend B, just sitting there in a lawn chair with a sour look on his face. "What the heck, A?" B demanded. "Where'd you go?" Confused, A snapped back at him. "What do you mean? You're the one who disappeared. We've been looking everywhere for you." As best I can recall, this is what B told us. He had split away from the group to cover more ground looking for A's phone. That's when he heard someone whisper, "Psst," from over by the edge of the woods. When B turned to look, he saw A motioning for B to follow him into the woods with a smirk on his face and a finger pressed to his lips. Now, A and B often like to play a lot of jump scare pranks on us, so this wouldn't have seemed to be overly strange or creepy. And B did in fact follow him into the woods. This is the part where my memory of the story gets a bit hazy. In a nutshell, B lost track of A while sneaking through the woods, and so he waited, quietly looking around for a bit before one of the girls either caught a glimpse of him or heard him walking in the shadows and freaked out. B gave up, emerging from the woods to calm our friend down and ask if anyone had seen A, eventually taking a seat by the fire pit to wait for us to return. The thing is, A had been with the rest of us the whole time, searching for his phone, and I myself can attest to that. Everyone else had been accounted for, either as part of the search party or sitting by the fire the whole time. But B swore up and down that he'd followed A into the trees, or at least someone who looked exactly like A and happened to be wearing the exact same clothing. The moon was fairly bright that night, and B said he had gotten close enough and had just enough light that he could clearly tell it was A, hunched over just outside the tree line, beckoning for him to follow. This really freaked us all out, and we spent the rest of that night inside S's basement. Someone even mentioned the idea of calling the police to tell them that there was a strange man trying to lure kids into the woods. But B was so adamant that who he'd seen was either A or some sort of creepy carbon copy of A. We believed him, and we figured it wasn't any use calling the cops if this thing was supernatural in origin. We never got any answers as to who or what it was that B followed into the woods that night, or what their intentions were. We could never figure out why that person or thing lured him into the dark forest, just to vanish without a sound and let B return to his friends. We've all kind of fallen out of contact over the 5 years since graduating high school, but whenever I do see my friends, that night always comes up in conversation, along with many other strange experiences we've had, both together and individually. Man, do I miss those days. Demonic Rental from Little Loth Cat. This takes place over the course of the past 2-ish years or so. I only lived in the rental for about half the school year, but I've been around the house since my sophomore year. My apologies for how long this might be, but there is a lot of build-up to my experience. So my former best friend, WG, had moved into a tiny little rental house with 3 other friends of ours. 2 of them I knew at the time, and 1 of them I had never met before until that year. Things were going well, but of course, in a house full of girls, things were bound to take a nasty turn at some point. Long story short, things just went a little strange, with 3 of the 4 women acting like complete children and bullying the other girl. I know now that they were the culprits, but at the time, I thought the 3 of them, my best friend being one of the bullies, were right. I go to a very Christian college. Because of that, more than half of the student population are Christians. That includes myself and those girls I mentioned. The 3 girls, WG, AJT, and VA, had noticed something was off about this house. One night, while E, the girl they weren't very kind to, was out, they went around dedicating the house to God. This meant anointing all the doorways of the house and praying over each room. WG and VA are very heavily religious, so it was up to them to do the dirty work. All of it was fine until they reached E's room, which would later become mine. What I find interesting is that, in their retellings, WG and VA had 2 different experiences upon entering the room. According to VA, WG had been speaking in tongues, and upon crossing the threshold, had tensed up and let out a loud hiss. She turned to VA saying, "Do you feel that?" VA, feeling powerful and safe, responded with an enthusiastic, "Yeah." WG, on the other hand, felt a very dark and dangerous presence in that room. She flicked on the lights, and in the brief second before dark gave way to light, both women saw a large black mass in the far corner with multiple red eyes, like it was a giant jumble of entities in one cloud. WG somehow managed to get them out of the house after a long time of yelling, praying, and saging the room. But according to WG, AJT, and VA, the demons had tried to return a few days later. Only WG could see them, prowling around the house trying to find a way in. The girls had gone around to write Bible verses on the windows to try and bar them from entering, but WG made the mistake of giving them names. A month later, E moved out of the house, and my story begins here. I moved in at the start of the school year. Things were exciting. I was in a house, living with my best friend, and things were going great. Everyone was excited to start fresh and new. It wasn't until late fall, early winter that I'd begun to realize I was being treated just as bad as E was by the rest of them. I began hiding away in my room, terrified of leaving just for the sake of getting food for fear of being yelled at for something I didn't do, or receiving the silent treatment. I began memorizing their schedules and leaving to eat and do laundry when I knew they wouldn't be around. That's when I began to see it. The first time I saw it, I was in the kitchen. The layout of the house was simple. It was a perfect box with rooms in either corner, a bathroom between the rooms on either side, and then a kitchen living room in the middle. That day, the door to the laundry room was closed, so I had a completely unobstructed view of both halls. While I was making my lunch, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a tall, humanoid shape walk from my side of the house over to the other hall. I had snapped my head around, expecting to see the heel of VA turning the corner. But based off the knowledge of their schedules, I was supposed to be the only one in the house for the next 4 hours. I checked the driveway. Her car was still gone. I knocked on her door too, but no answer. I brushed it off as maybe seeing my hair out of the corner of my eye, or just the general anxiety I felt while living in that house. But more and more things began cropping up. I began to have more frequent nightmares. My room would get ice cold, far colder than any other room in the house. My closet light would flicker on and off when I was trying to sleep. I'd heard men's voices outside my room when the TV wasn't on, and no one was on the porch. And that shadowy being, whatever it was, began getting bolder. The more afraid I got in that house, the more scared I became of those girls. The more I saw it, I would catch it dead on when leaving my room. It liked to watch me while I cooked, or stand in the hallway while I did my laundry. Eventually, it migrated into my room, hovering in the same corner the girls said the first demons were in. I could not always see it, but if I stood a certain way or got scared, it would be there. What's strange is that I never felt like I was in danger around that thing. In truth, those girls had me more frightened than it. I didn't feel safe around it, certainly, but I didn't feel like I was being attacked. It was just there. But I did grow tired of it being in my room. So one day, I plucked up my courage and finally spoke to it directly. I don't know what you are. I don't want to know. But I need you to hear this, here and now. This is my space, and my space alone. You have no permission to invade or affect my living situation in this area. You have not caused me active harm, and I have tolerated you. But I request that if you must be in the house, you leave my room be. It's the only safe space I have left. Perhaps foolish, I probably should have told it to get out of the house entirely. But by this point, I was tired of being scared, and half hoped it would bother the other girls for treating me so poorly. I could not do anything to get back at them without retaliation being brutal. In my petty, cowardly little mind, I thought it would be nice if an entity would do it for me, because to me it seemed God certainly wasn't doing anything to fix my situation, no matter how much I prayed. The moment I finished talking, I heard what sounded like a dog scrabbling for purchase on carpet, like nails or claws hurriedly raking along cloth. I physically felt something rush by me, then flee out of my room. The thing was still there, but it never entered my room again. A few weeks later, we had gotten together for our weekly D&D sessions when VA walked out of her room carrying an ornate little box. She looked very proud and eager to show everyone what was inside. Out she pulls a very long knife with a wavy blade, sort of like one you would see as a sacrificial knife in movies. It's supposedly haunted, she told us. My family got it in Indonesia. I was floored. No wonder they had demons in the house. I'm not sure that thing was used for sacrifices per se, but if you had a supposedly haunted knife, you'd think that maybe there's some form of connection to your experiences at this house. After our game ended, I tried to ask VA if she knew what it was haunted with. She gave me the most venomous glare I had yet received from her. Heck if I know, she responded. Thankfully, a month after everything had gone on, I managed to get out of the lease and out of that blasted house. My mom came to help me move out of there and into a dorm. As we left, I asked her if she'd felt anything wrong in that place, curious to see if I'd simply been crazy. She gave me a startled look, then nodded. She had, in fact, sensed something on the left side of the house, and said that just as we were leaving, she saw some sort of shadowy figure leave my room. I've since become good friends with E in the wake of all this. The other girls I'm no longer in contact with and will never speak to again. While retelling our stories of living in the house, she made an offhand comment about seeing a figure in our room as well. I pressed her for more. Did you ever feel afraid of it? I asked. She shook her head. No, I felt safer with it than with them. but it wasn't good. I'm going to guess it was a demon. I can't think of anything else that it could have been. I do believe in the paranormal, but I'm skeptical about ghosts. Demons, though, they absolutely exist. I'm willing to believe in cryptids and other things we can't explain as well, but I'm not sure where I stand on ghosts, and I sincerely doubt this thing was anything but demonic. Or perhaps it could have been another entity entirely. Whatever it was, I think it was a warning to us both, and I can only hope it will serve that same purpose for the next unfortunate roommate that comes in to take my place. I hope she can get out sooner and safer than I did. It was in the attic. From Nina Bug, 1998. I was in the 3rd grade. I'm 24 now. My mother, stepfather, and I moved into a big old brick house. It was one of the oldest in town, but it looked normal, not in a creepy area. It had a huge yard and was 2 levels. The upstairs was 3 rooms, my bedroom, my toy room, and a big open area. The big open area had the entrance to the attic. It was just a board you lifted and moved to the side. Keep that in mind. The first floor was the kitchen, dining room, living room, bathroom, and my parents' room, and a little closet. The creepiest place to me was not the basement, as you would expect, which had dirt floors and crap like that. No, it was the beautiful upstairs that scared me. I always felt as if I was being watched. I never felt alone up there. One night, about 2 months after we moved in, I heard a strange sound from the open area. We had 2 cats, so I thought it was one of them. I opened my bedroom door and peeked out. One of our cats, Riley, even though we called her Mama's, because she was an old cat, was sitting at the top of these stairs, refusing to come any closer. She was looking up at the ceiling, or more accurately, the attic. I don't know why, but I followed her gaze. That might be what saved my life that night. The board over the entrance was moving. I watched a hand with long claw-like fingers come out, then another, then a head. If you've ever seen Lord of the Rings, then you'll know what I mean when I say it looked like that guy that's always like, my precious, with the ring, but it was more bony than that. It turned its head and looked at me with dark eyes. I don't know if there were no eyes or if they were just really dark, to be honest. I quickly closed my bedroom door, and I pulled my dresser in front of it. Keep in mind I was in 3rd grade. I was so scared that I managed to move a big oak dresser in front of the door. I then heard knocking and my mother's voice telling me to open the door up, but I still didn't. There was no way she'd be checking on me at 3 or 4 in the morning. She never checked on me like that, so I didn't open the door. I sat with my back against the dresser, and I kept hearing her. But the longer I refused to open the door, the angrier she got, and the less it sounded like her. I began to hear scratching at the door. I still refused to open it. I was horrified, but somehow managed to fall asleep. When I woke up, it was daytime, and my mother was pounding on the door, yelling at me for missing the school bus and scratching up the door. It took me a bit, but I was able to move my dresser enough to open my door and peek out. My mother was glaring at me and yelling at me for ruining the door, as we were only renting the house. "Do you have any idea how much that's going to cost?" That's what she was worried about, the freaking door. I looked at it and saw deep scratches all over it. I told her I didn't do that and tried to explain what happened last night, but she still yelled and refused to even try to believe me. After that incident, I refused to go back upstairs. After a week of sleeping on the couch, I convinced them to move my bedroom into the little closet. It barely fit my bed, dresser, and nightstand. I would have to push my bed to open my dresser enough to get to the bottom 2 drawers. As I said before, I never went back upstairs, not even for my toys. For nearly a whole year after, I simply left them up there, untouched. I never saw that thing again after that night. Eventually, we moved out of that house, and I refused to be alone when I packed my things upstairs. I invited my friend over a lot to help me pack too. I just felt better with someone up there with me. Of course, I never found out what it was or what it wanted. In the end, I didn't care if I ever did find out. I just didn't want to see it ever again. That brings us to the end of this episode of Darkness Prevails. More terrifying stories are on the way soon, so subscribe and smash that like button. By the way, did you know this show is available as a podcast called Unexplained Encounters? Just search for, follow, and rate Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. This show is part of the EerieCast network. Go to EerieCast.com for more scary podcasts, such as Freaky Folklore, which explores your favorite monsters, myths, and mysteries, as well as Redwood Bureau, a fictional horror podcast about an agent on the run from an evil secret organization that captures supernatural creatures and entities. Well, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.